Hi there, Super Duty owners. Today in your 2018 Ford F-350 Super Duty, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install TorkLift's StableLoad suspension enhancement system. These are available with either a black powder coat finish or stainless steel, and there are two different kits available depending if you need to drill holes in your overload springs or if you have pre-existing holes in your overload springs. You can use our fit guide to help you determine the appropriate kit to get, but it's always a good measure to just double check your overload springs and look for holes. You can see here where our bolt runs down through our overload spring. This is where you're going to want to look to see if you have a hole there or not. If there's no hole, you'll need the kit that comes with a couple of drill bits. These drill bits are special drill bits designed to drill through the thick and hard material found in your overload spring. If you do have a hole, you're in luck because the installation is significantly easier with the no drill kit. The kit is basically the same, it just doesn't come with the special drill bits to make those holes.
These suspension stabilizers work in conjunction with your existing overload springs by making them come into contact with your leaf spring immediately. So that way you're always getting this extra load carrying benefit. Having your overload spring engaged all the time will help stiffen up your rear suspension. This will help improve handling because you won't have as much body roll. It'll also help your braking performance because you're going to have a more stable rear end and the weight can be properly transferred onto your front tires to have a good stop. When going over bumps and potholes, you won't feel those as much and you won't get so much oscillation between the front and back. What's nice about these compared to airbags and upgraded jounce bumpers is these can be completely disengaged to return you to your factory feel by pulling the cotter pin and the lock pin there. And this will now rotate. Rotating it in this direction. We'll disengage it because it's not contacting our leaf spring or our overload spring. So that puts us back to our factory setting. The pin can then be reinserted and this will hold it in the disengaged position. You can do this with each one and then you're back to your factory ride feel. The slanted edge on our wedges helps increase the amount of surface area between our leaf spring and our overload spring, as well as making it easier to engage and disengage our wedges. Another benefit of this suspension enhancement over airbags is being solid pieces of metal. It's going to be a lot more reliable. Airbags have the tendency to where they can pop or develop leaks on the lines or fittings, where you don't have to worry about that with these. Another thing is that airbags can change pressure depending on temperature. So going from hot to cold can vary that and you'll have to adjust it. This is a lot less maintenance. The first thing you'll want to do is determine which kit you need. Look at your lower overload spring and determine if you have a hole there. We don't have a hole, so you see that I'm drilling it out here. We're using the included drill bit to drill through the lower overload spring, and we want to do that 1 inch back from the end of our spring. Take your time and go slow, as your overload springs are made of some pretty thick and difficult metal to drill through, so you want to give yourself plenty of time and make sure you use patience when drilling them out. All right, we just made it through this one here. We've already drilled the rest of our holes all the way until we just barely saw a small dimple at the top side. That's a good time to stop and move on to the next hole because the last little bit going through, chunks can break off and it can cause damage to the bit that's come in your kit, which could hinder you from finishing the job. So go ahead and get them all drilled out to that little dimple, and then you can go back and pass through that last little bit at the very end. Before lifting up on the back of the vehicle, it's always a good idea to chalk your front wheels because your back wheels is what holds it steady when you're in park. So if you lift the back wheels off the ground, it could potentially roll. We're now lifting up on the back of the vehicle. We're on a lift, so we're using a pole jack, but you can just use your floor jack at home. You can put it under your hitch, and lifting up on the back is going to increase the gap between our leaf spring and our overload spring so we can get our hardware in. Before you do this, it is a good idea that you take some measurements to get an idea of what you're going to be using as far as the number of plates. I've already gone ahead and done these measurements, but what you would do is go 3 inches from the end of the leaf spring in and measure the gap between these two. For ours, we measured a little bit less than ½ an inch all the way around, which means we're only going to be using a single plate. We're not going to be using all 3 plates. You'll refer to your instructions if your gap is different than ours. And use the number of plates accordingly. Now take the bolts with the low profile head included in your kit, and these will slide down through the holes that you either drilled out or were pre-existing in your leaf spring. Now, even though you lifted up the back end, you're likely going to still need a pry bar to get in your hardware. The front ones are even harder than the rear ones, so you have to pry down some and then slide your bolt in after prying down. You may need an extra set of hands. We'll now pre-assemble our packs. Now, you have multiple of these that come in your kit, and there are 2 for each side of each type of plate. And this is going to be your lower plate. Then you have your plate that goes on top of that, your second smallest, and then you have your third smallest. And you're going to stack these up depending on the measurements that you took for the distance between your overload spring and your leaf spring. Since ours measured less than ½ an inch all the way around, we're not going to be using the 2 top plates, just the bottom plate. We'll then take the stack bolt, and this is where you would slide them to clamp them all together through. If you had multiple, you would also slide those on there, and then you would clamp them all together with this nut. Regardless if you're just using the single plate without any on it, still install the nut, and then tighten it down using a 15mm socket and wrench. Now, our lower plate here, this is what we're going to be using. Take the grommet that comes in your kit and push that into the small outer hole on the little dimple that pokes out there. Now, your plates here can be installed in a couple different ways. You can install it with the grommet towards the inside like this, or you could install it with the grommet towards the outside. It will work either way. The thing that you're really looking for is clearance, because as your axle and leaf springs move up and down, you want to make sure it's not going to hit anything. And here on the passenger side in the front, it looks like we're fine. We're going to clear on the outside. So you can see here on the driver's side, we've got these cables that are in the way, so we're not going to be putting it on the outside for the fronts. For both of our fronts, we're going to be sliding it on like that towards the inside. For the rear, we are going to put those on the outside, but for these fronts, we're going to put them on the inside due to those cables. We'll then need to put our stop in. We don't want this rotating underneath the overload spring. So the small bolt that comes in your kit, we're going to put that in the outermost hole. And this is going to vary depending on the width of your leaf spring, but since ours is so thick, we're going to be using the largest setting, which is just a single bolt here. So then we'll tighten that down using a 10mm socket and wrench. We can now take our lower bracket. We're going to slide it over our bolt that we put in, place a lock washer on the bottom, and then one of the brass colored nuts below it. We're just going to leave that hand tight for now. We can now put our plates in. The angled edge here, we want this to pivot towards the inside to make contact. The wedge should go in towards like that. So now we'll take the large bolt that comes in our kit. We're going to go down through the hole next to the square there. And on the bottom, we want to put washers on it that's going to equal the thickness of our overload spring. We're going to be using 8 for ours. And then this is going to slide down through the large hole here. And then on the bottom, we'll place a lock nut. And now we'll tighten it down with a 19mm socket and wrench. And we just want to snug this. We don't want it to be real tight, because we want to be able to pivot this in and out. So we still got a little bit of slack in it, but that's okay. We might snug it down a little bit later, but we're going to come back to tightening that up to a later point. For now, we're going to go back to our brass bolt, and we're going to tighten that up. We're going to make sure we've got that bolt that we put in here up against the leaf spring, and then tighten this down with a 17mm socket. We're going to come back to this bolt now. We're just going to snug it down just a little bit more to help take up some of that slack. Again, it is normal for it to be a little loose because we do have to twist it in and out, so we don't want it to be overly tight to where we can't move it. And that's decent enough. It's got a little resistance in it.
but not too bad. So what we've got here is we've got the disengaged position and we've got the engaged position when you twist it in. Now, I can't twist it in quite by hand, but that's okay. You'll see there's a square hole towards the back here where you can place a 3/8" ratchet in to assist you turning it in. So you can see here, if I go with my ratchet, it pokes into the square here, and then we can twist it until it engages, and then we can take the pin and drop it down through the upper plate until it goes through our grommet there. All we then do is place the pin here through it, and that is the engaged position. To remove it from the engaged position, remove your pin, twist it out, and then you'll have another hole there that will allow our pin to go back in, slide down through, and pin it in place. It is recommended when you push your pin in to actually push it all the way through until your pin hangs down like that. That way there's no chance that your pin's going to fall out. Now that we've got that set up in the disengaged position, we're going to go ahead and repeat those same procedures on the remaining 3 holes that we had drilled out to get all the rest of the stable loads on. And that completes our look at TorkLift's StableLoad suspension enhancement system on our 2018 Ford F-350 Super Duty.